Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're stepping into the box, the CrossFit box.
Mm-hmm.
You see it everywhere now, don't you? People throwing weights around, these really intense workouts. It's huge.
It really is constantly varied, high intensity.
But, with that intensity, you also hear the whispers, maybe see headlines. Is it actually as risky, injury-wise, as some people say?
That's the big question, isn't it?
So, to really try and get beyond just anecdotes, we're diving deep into some serious research today.
Okay.
We've got this massive study, multi-year, published in the Orthopedic Journal of Sports Medicine. It looks specifically at injury incidence and rates in CrossFit.
Yeah, and that's what's great about this paper. It aimed to give some solid empirical evidence because, a lot of the previous stuff was smaller scale.
Right, and lots of media buzz.
Exactly. So our plan today is just to unpack what this paper found, what the data says, who gets injured, where, how often, based purely on this research.
Perfect. So consider this your guide, your evidence-based picture of what this one big study found about CrossFit safety, straight from the source.
So first off, how does the paper define CrossFit? Well, they put it under the umbrella of HIFT, high-intensity functional training.
HIFT, okay.
Yeah, it's all about those constantly varied, high-intensity functional movements, the goal being like broad general fitness for everyone.
And the paper itself notes this background, right? Like,
Mhm.
despite it being super popular, there's been media linking it to injuries, even serious stuff,
They mentioned rhabdomyolysis specifically.
which is that condition where muscle breaks down really severely.
That's the one. And yeah, that whole context is why looking at the safety data is so important.
So this study was needed.
Right. The authors felt previous studies, often with small groups, didn't give the full picture. This bigger one aimed for a broader view.
Okay, so how'd they do it? You said it was a big survey.
Yeah, a large online survey. They got responses from over 3,000 adults who do CrossFit.
Wow.
It's mostly US-based, but international too, surveyed between 2013 and 2017.
And who exactly took part?
So adults 18 plus, and crucially, they had to have at least 3 months of CrossFit experience already.
Ah, so not total beginners on day one.
No. And this is really key how they defined an injury.
Okay.
It wasn't just like feeling sore. It had to be linked to CrossFit serious enough that you went to a medical professional and it made you stop or cut back on training or even need surgery.
That's a pretty high bar for defining an injury.
It is. And it's important to remember that when we look at the numbers, they also asked about, how often people train, how long they've been doing it, age, sex, body part injured, and that rhabdo diagnosis question.
Got it. And the paper mentions two ways of looking at injuries: incidence and rate. Incidence is just the percentage of people who got hurt, right?
Yep, pretty much. In this case, the percentage reporting any injury fitting that definition in the last year.
But the rate is maybe more revealing because it accounts for like how much time you're actually spending doing the activity.
Exactly. It's injuries per 1,000 hours of training. It adjusts for exposure. And the study calculated a range for this, using different assumptions about how many hours people actually train per week.
Smart. Gives a more nuanced picture.
Yeah.
So what did they find overall, that incidence number first?
Okay, so based on their definition and survey, 30.5%, just over 30%, reported at least one injury in the previous 12 months.
30%. And where were people getting hurt? Did the paper break that down?
It did. Shoulders were number one. 39% of those injured reported a shoulder issue.
Okay.
Then the back, 36%. After that, knees at 15%, elbows 12%, and wrists 11%.
Shoulders and back leading the way. Was it different for men and women?
The locations were pretty similar, actually, though the paper did note men reported a higher total number of injuries throughout the study.
Interesting. What about rhabdomyolysis, that serious condition?
They reported 6 cases among everyone surveyed, so that works out to about 0.6% of those who got injured, or maybe 0.2% of the entire sample.
So very rare in this group.
Very rare. And the authors do mention it can happen in other intense activities, too. It's not exclusive to CrossFit.
Right. Okay, but let's get to the injury rate. Per hour of training, what did those numbers look like?
This is where it gets interesting. Their calculated rate fell between 0.27 injuries per 1,000 workout hours and 0.74 injuries per 1,000 hours. That range depends on the assumptions about weekly training time.
0.27 to 0.74. How does that compare?
Well, the paper points out these rates are actually lower than some rates reported in other, perhaps smaller, CrossFit studies they cited. Some of those were more like 2.4 to 3.5 per 1,000 hours.
Oh, wow. So quite a bit lower in this large study.
Yeah. And based on these findings, the authors concluded that CrossFit training seems relatively safe compared with more traditional training modalities.
Relatively safe.
Okay.
Did they see differences in rates based on age or sex?
They looked, but didn't find statistically significant differences in the overall rates between age groups or between men and women, even though, as we said, men reported more total injuries over time.
Okay, this is fascinating. The overall rate seems lower than may be feared, according to this paper.
Yeah.
But did the data show if certain groups were at higher risk per hour?
Yes, absolutely. And this is probably the biggest takeaway for you listening. The study did find specific groups with significantly higher injury rates.
Okay.
Factor number 1, experience level. Newer people had much higher rates per hour.
Really?
Yeah. Those with less than 6 months experience, their rate was up to 3.90 per 1,000 hours.
Almost 4, compared to the overall average of under 1.
Exactly. And even those with 6 to 12 months experience were still high, up to 3.21 per 1,000 hours. The paper stated clearly, the injury rate was inversely proportional to experience. More experience, lower rate per hour.
Wow. Okay, so beginners, people in their first year, are at a significantly higher risk per hour of training. That feels slightly counterintuitive, maybe, because you might think experienced people get injured more just because they've done it longer.
That's a really good point to clarify. It's true. Someone training for, say, 5 years might have had more total injuries over those 5 years than a beginner.
Right. Just accumulated more over time.
But when you look at the risk per hour you spend doing it, this study's data clearly shows that risk is much higher when you're new. That first year, especially the first 6 months, seems to be the riskiest time per hour trained.
Okay, that's a huge finding. What was the other risk factor?
The second one was frequency of participation. And this one might also surprise you.
Gold.
People who train less often had significantly higher injury rates.
Less often, like fewer days a week.
Yeah. Participants training fewer than 3 days per week had a rate up to 2.46 per 1,000 hours.
Higher again.
Much higher than those training 3 to 5 days a week. Their rate was up to 0.90. And even lower for those training more than 5 days a week. Theirs was down to 0.53 per 1,000 hours. Fewer workouts per week also meant higher rates per hour.
So showing up less often seems riskier per hour, according to this data. That is interesting. It's not just about intensity, but maybe consistency and how you adapt.
It really suggests that, doesn't it? So let's try and tie this together. The study's main conclusion, based on their specific data and that strict injury definition, is that CrossFit seems relatively safe for most people, especially when you look at injury rates compared to some other activities.
Okay. Relatively safe overall rate.
But with those significant caveats about beginners and less frequent participants having higher rates.
Right. Did they guess why that might be?
They speculated a bit. Maybe it's the complex movements they take, skill, strength, flexibility that newcomers haven't built up yet. Or perhaps people who train less often or are new push themselves too hard too soon without the technique or conditioning base.
That makes sense. So this has real implications for you, the listener. If you're
Yeah.
considering CrossFit, or maybe you're in that first year.
Yeah, this data really emphasizes how important that initial tally is, and finding a consistent rhythm seems potentially protective based on these numbers.
Did the study offer advice for coaches or gyms?
It did. Based on these findings, they recommended that fitness professionals should really pay close attention to people in their first year and also to those training infrequently less than 3 days or workouts a week.
Focus on the newbies and the less consistent folks.
Exactly. They suggested maybe developing specific beginner tracks or programs that really focus on building skills gradually over that first year to potentially lower that initial higher risk.
Good practical advice. Now, we should mention it was a survey study, right? Do they talk about limitations?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They acknowledge things like recall bias, people maybe not remembering perfectly,
Sure.
and it being a convenience sample, people chose to respond online, so it's not perfectly random, mostly recruited via social media.
So maybe people who had been injured were more likely to click the link.
That's a possibility they mention, which, if true, could mean the actual rates in a totally representative sample might be even lower. But they did try to get a better picture using that strict injury definition and calculating the rates per hour.
Okay, so wrapping up the key messages from this specific paper. Injuries happen, yes. but the rate per hour might be lower than some feared.
According to this data, yes.
And crucially, the data points to beginners and people training less often as having a significantly higher risk per hour they train.
That seems to be the strongest signal regarding risk factors in this particular study. It really highlights that how injury is defined matters, and looking at rates per hour gives you that crucial context of exposure.
It really does. It makes you think. This study underlines how vital consistency and maybe structured foundational learning could be when you take on something physically complex and demanding like CrossFit. What does that suggest to you about how we approach new challenges, whether it's fitness or really any new skill? How might focusing on building those basics, progressing gradually, actually change the whole experience, maybe making it safer, more sustainable, something to think about?